The Force binds all things across the galaxy. No, not this galaxy. This story begins somewhere the Force has never touched, where a different kind of faith holds a dying people together. No subspace signal announced the arrival. No sensor grid flagged an anomaly. One moment the sector was empty, patrolled only by starlight and the silence between stars. The next, space itself seemed to tear, a wound of blue-white radiation blooming open like a scar refusing to heal. And something fell through. It was not a starship, as this galaxy understood the word. It had no warp nacelles, no deflector dish, no elegant curves born of a civilization that had made peace with the stars centuries ago. It was armor and iron in desperation, a battlestar the length of a small city, her hull scorched black in places, streaked with the carbon fire of 100 desperate battles, flanked by a ragged constellation of freighters, tankers, and transports that had no business surviving one jump, let alone the thousands that had brought them here. This was the Battlestar Galactica, and she had just fallen out of reality itself. Third-person omniscient would serve this story best, a tale too large for one perspective, spanning a beleaguered fleet, a federation stretched thin by war, and the fragile, dangerous thing that grows between strangers who have every reason not to trust one another. This is a story about two kinds of survival: the quiet, hard-won survival of people who have lost everything, and the fragile survival of an idea that different civilizations might learn to stand together, tested by war on one side and trauma on the other. The year, by the reckoning of the galaxy Galactica, had entered, was 2374. The United Federation of Planets stood at the edge of its greatest trial. The Dominion War, a conflict against an empire of shapeshifters and genetically bred soldiers that had already cost thousands of lives and threatened to unmake everything the Federation believed about itself. Starfleet vessels ran ragged tours along contested borders. Klingon warbuds prowled for glory and blood. The Romulan Star Empire watched from the shadows, waiting to see which way the war would tip before committing to anything. Into this galaxy, already straining under the weight of its own war, came a fleet that had been running far longer than the Federation had been fighting. Aboard Galactica's Combat Information Center, Commander William Adama stared at a tactical display that made no sense. The jump had been a last resort, a blind calculation made with failing Drotty's arrays and a navigation computer half-fried by silent sabotage. Executed, because the alternative was annihilation at the hands of a silent base star closing on the fleet's last fumes of Tilium fuel. He had expected to emerge somewhere in the same dark, indifferent universe that had hunted his people to the edge of extinction. He had not expected the sky outside to be wrong. The stars were unfamiliar. That alone was not remarkable. The fleet had jumped blind more times than Adama cared to count, chasing rumors of Earth through systems no colonial had ever charted. But the readings were wrong. Radiation signatures that made no physical sense. Faint energy trails that Drotty's operators swore looked like wakes, as if something had passed through the space around them, leaving ripples in the fabric of the void itself. "Colonel," Adama said quietly, "get me a full sensor sweep. I want to know exactly where in God's names we are." Colonel Saltai didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the main view screen, where 3 points of light had resolved into a formation, small vessels, sleek and rounded, moving with a grace that no colonial engineer had ever designed into a hull. They weren't silent. They weren't anything. "Sir," the tactical officer said, voice tight, "unknown contacts. 3 of them. They're hailing us." The bridge went silent. Not the silence of confusion, but the older, colder silence of a crew who had learned, through years of betrayal, that anyone offering a greeting might be wearing a human face over something else entirely. On speakers, Adama said, "Audio only. I don't want them seeing our CIC layout until I know who the hell they are." The voice that came through was calm, measured, almost gentle, a tone Adama hadn't heard directed at his fleet in longer than he wanted to remember. Asterisk, unidentified vessels. This is Lieutenant Commander Tprina of the Federation starship USS Bellerophon. You have entered Federation space without transponder identification. Please respond and state your intentions. We mean you no harm. Asterisk. Federation. Adama had never heard the word applied to a starfaring power before. It meant nothing to him, and that more than any weapon lock was what unsettled him most. In his experience, everyone who mattered in the universe had a name he already knew. The 12 colonies, the Cylons, the empty myth of a 13th tribe called Earth. A power this confident, this untroubled by his fleet's arrival, calling itself something entirely new. It did not fit any shape he understood. Attempt to establish a picture of their capabilities before we respond, Adama ordered. Tai, quietly, I want Viper Squadron spun up and ready, but not launched. If this is a trick, I want to see the trick before I answer it. Tai's jaw tightened, the old, practiced look of a man who had learned to expect betrayal as a law of nature. You think it's them? The toasters found a new way to talk. I don't think anything yet, Adama said. That's exactly the problem. Behind them, on a smaller display, Lieutenant Gaeta had frozen mid-readout, staring at a resolution of the alien ship's hull markings that made no sense against any known Cylon or colonial design language. Smooth, confident lines built by hands that had never known the specific paranoia of building a warship expecting betrayal from within. Whatever this Federation was, it had not been built by people running from a genocide. That Adama thought, watching the strange, graceful ship hold position rather than close for a kill shot, might be the most dangerous thing about it. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, wait, wrong story. And this crew would tell you exactly what they think of a franchise crossover template that didn't check its own premise. If you want to see more impossible fleets collide with impossible galaxies, hit that subscribe button and drop a crossover idea in the comments below. May the fracking force, may the gods of Kobol be with you. The Bellerophon held her position at a respectful distance, running light steady, weapons, as far as colonial sensors could tell, power down. It was a gesture Adama recognized instantly, because it was the same gesture Galactica made 1,000 times a day toward frightened civilian ships in her own fleet. We could hurt you, and we are choosing not to. The question was whether it meant anything from a species that had never learned, the way the colonials had, exactly how cheap that choice could become. Send this, Adama said finally. Battlestar Galactica. Commander William Adama commanding. We are a refugee fleet. We are not hostile. We request information regarding our location and intend no incursion into your territory. He paused. Do not offer specifics about our numbers, our fuel status, or our defenses. Tai raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Diplomacy wasn't Adama's natural language, but caution was, and right now caution would do. The response came back within the minute. And this time it wasn't just Trina's voice, it was an image, resolving on the main viewer despite Galactica systems having no compatibility protocol that should have allowed it. A Vulcan face, dark-eyed and composed, framed by a uniform in muted grays and burgundy that meant nothing to anyone in that CAC. Asterisk Commander Adama. I am Lieutenant Commander Trina. You are approximately 4 light years from Deep Space Nine, within space claimed by the United Federation of Planets. I must inform you that this region has seen recent hostile activity related to an ongoing conflict. For your safety and ours, I recommend you allow us to escort you to a secure area while we determine the nature of your arrival. Asterisk. Ongoing conflict. Adama's eyes flicked to Tai. 2 words that, in his experience, meant everything and explained nothing. Ask her what kind of conflict, Tai muttered. She'll tell us in her own time, Adama said. Or she won't, and that'll tell us something too. He raised his voice. Commander Trina, we appreciate the offer, but my people have learned through hard experience not to follow strangers to unknown coordinates. We would prefer you send a shuttle unarmed to dock with Galactica directly so that this Federation and my fleet can speak face to face. There was a pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. Then asterisk, that is an unusual request, Commander, but not an unreasonable one. Stand by. Asterisk. On the Bellerophon's bridge, Trina turned to her captain, a broad-shouldered Balian named Vecma, who had been listening with the particular stillness of an officer recalculating everything he thought he knew about first contact protocol. They don't trust remote coordinates, Vecma said. They want physical presence. That's not standard caution, Commander. That's the caution of people who've been lied to about coordinates before. Agreed, Trina said. Recommend we honor the request. A single officer, unarmed, minimal escort. It will require some flexibility with Starfleet First Contact Protocol. Noted and ignored, Vecma said, almost fondly. Get Ensign Corin ready. And Trina, go with her. If anyone can read what's actually happening over there, it's you. The shuttle that eventually approached Galactica's flight pod was small, sleek, and utterly unlike anything the deck crew had ever prepped a landing bay for. Chief Petty Officer Galen Tyrol watched it settle onto the deck with the wary fascination of a man assessing a machine he could not immediately take apart and understand. And in his line of work, that alone was cause for concern. No visible weapons ports, he reported over the comm, no landing gear stress marks like a shuttle that's seen real combat. This thing's never been shot at. Copy that. Ty's voice crackled back. Keep security tight anyway. Politeness gets people killed same as anything else. When the hatch opened, Trina stepped out first, followed by a young human ensign who could not stop staring. Not with fear, Tyrol noted, but with something closer to wonder. The open-faced astonishment of someone encountering hardship for the first time as a historical curiosity rather than a lived reality. It told Tyrol more about the Federation than any sensor reading could have. These people had not seen desperation up close in a very long time. Adama met them personally at the base of the ramp, flanked by armed Marines who made no effort to look anything but armed. Trina's gaze moved across them, the wear on their uniforms patched and repatched, the tired, watchful eyes of every crewman in the bay, the absence, she noted immediately, of anything resembling a replicator, a transporter pad, or any of the conveniences her own service took for granted. Commander Adama, she said, inclining her head with careful formality. On behalf of the United Federation of Planets, I extend our welcome and our concern. You appear to have traveled a very long way, under very difficult circumstances. You have no idea, Adama said. It wasn't unfriendly. It was simply true. I would like to understand, Trina said. But I recognize that trust is not something either of our peoples can offer freely on first meeting. I propose we begin with facts we can verify, rather than promises we cannot. It was, Adama thought, the single most reasonable thing anyone outside his own command staff had said to him in 4 years. He still didn't trust it. Reasonable people could be built out of malice, as easily as reasonable machines could be built to look human. He had learned that lesson in blood and hull breaches and the faces of friends who had turned out to be something else entirely. Start with where we are, Adama said. And what this war is that you keep almost mentioning. Trina's expression did not change, but something in her tone sharpened with the particular gravity of someone about to explain a wound still actively bleeding. The Federation is engaged in a war against an interstellar power called the Dominion. It is the largest conflict our civilization has faced in generations. I tell you this not to alarm you, Commander, but because if your fleet remains in this region, neutrality may not be a choice available to you for long. Behind Adama, Ty's expression hardened into the particular grimness of a man who had heard those words in a dozen different shapes across a dozen different disasters, and had never once seen them followed by good news. The negotiations that followed took place not in Galactica CIC, but in the observation lounge just off it, a room with a long table, poor lighting, and walls that had absorbed 40 years of tense conversations before this one. Adama had chosen it deliberately. He wanted Trina somewhere that felt like colonial territory, not neutral ground. Trust, in his experience, was a resource you spent carefully, and right now he intended to spend none of it. Your offer, Adama said, once the pleasantries had exhausted themselves, is medical supplies, fuel, you call it deuterium. We'll need to verify our reactors can even use it, and safe transit to this space station of yours. In exchange for what? Nothing, Commander, Trina said. The Federation does not require compensation for humanitarian aid. Ty made a small, disbelieving sound that he didn't bother to disguise as a cough. Everyone requires something, Adama said. Maybe not credits, maybe not fuel, but nothing is free, Commander Trina, and I've buried too many people who believed otherwise. If Trina was insulted, her Vulcan composure gave no sign of it. I understand your skepticism is rooted in experience I do not yet fully understand. I will not insult you by claiming perfect altruism. The Federation does hope that goodwill now builds a foundation for future relations, trade, cultural exchange, eventual alliance, should both parties desire it. But the aid itself is offered without condition. Future relations, Adama repeated. You don't know a damn thing about us. You don't know what we are, where we came from, or what's chasing us. And you're already talking about alliance. I know that your ships show extensive combat damage consistent with sustained, recent conflict, T'Prina said. I know that your fleet includes a disproportionate number of civilian vessels relative to military ones, suggesting evacuation rather than invasion. And I know that despite clear technological inferiority relative to our own vessels, your people have chosen caution over aggression at every point of this encounter, which speaks to discipline, not desperation alone. I do not need your full history to recognize that you are people worth extending good faith toward, Commander. I simply need to observe. It was, Adama had to admit, a more perceptive assessment than he'd expected, and that unsettled him more than flattery would have. Cylons did their homework too. Cylons had worn human faces so convincingly that men had shared beds with them for years without knowing. A species this observant, this quick to construct a sympathetic read of strangers, was exactly the kind of thing he had learned, at terrible cost, to fear most. I'm going to be direct with you, Adama said. For years ago, an enemy of ours, the Cylons, infiltrated our society so completely that some of our own officers didn't know they weren't human until it was too late. They look like us. They talk like us. They can pass every test we have, except when we don't fully understand ourselves. So when a species I've never heard of shows up offering exactly the kind of unconditional kindness that would make the perfect trap, you'll forgive me if reasonable reads to me as a threat category, not a comfort. For the first time, T'Prina's composure shifted. Not fear, but genuine, focused interest. You are describing an enemy capable of biological or technological mimicry, so advanced it defeats identification even under intimate scrutiny. That's a polite way of putting it. Then I will be equally direct, Commander. The Federation has encountered shape-shifting adversaries as well. The Dominion's ruling species, the Founders, possess that exact capability. It is, in fact, one of the primary reasons the war you have arrived in the middle of has proven so difficult. Trust between allies has become a strategic vulnerability the Dominion actively exploits. She paused. I tell you this not to frighten you further, but because I believe it may be the single fact most likely to earn your genuine trust. We understand precisely the fear you are describing. We live with it daily. The room went quiet. Behind Adama, Ty's arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. But Adama caught the faint shift in his old friend's stance, the recognition, however grudging, that the woman across the table had just handed them something that cost her something to say. That doesn't mean I trust you, Adama said. It should not, T'Prina agreed. Not yet. I would think less of your judgment if it did. It was such an un-Cylon thing to say. No infiltrator Adama had ever unmasked had encouraged him to keep doubting them. That for just a moment, something in his chest loosened, fractionally, warily, the way a man's shoulders drop half an inch after months of carrying a weight he stopped noticing. He didn't let it show. Here's what we'll accept, he said. Fuel and medical supplies, transferred at a distance. No boarding parties beyond a skeleton crew we can screen personally. No coordinates to your station until we've had time to evaluate your intentions independently. And no promises about alliance, war, or anything else beyond today. My people have run a long way to end up somewhere new. I intend to make sure it isn't somewhere worse. That is acceptable, T'Prina said. I would ask one thing in return, Commander, not as a condition, but as a request. Allow me to remain aboard Galactica under whatever restrictions your security requires, so that I might continue this conversation. I believe there is more your people and mine could learn from one another than either of us currently understands. Adama studied her for a long moment, the still, patient face of a species he knew nothing about, offering to stay inside the belly of a fleet that had every reason to hurt her if suspicion went out. Ty, he said finally, get her a bunk in officers' quarters. 2 guards, rotating shifts, no exceptions. He turned back to Caprina. You'll be watched every hour you're aboard this ship. I would expect nothing less, Caprina said, and for the first time, something almost like the ghost of approval crossed her Vulcan features. Commander, may I ask what you are watching for specifically? Adama's answer came without hesitation, the accumulated instinct of 4 years distilled into 6 words. Anything that looks too easy. Caprina's quarters, such as they were, consisted of a bunk that had belonged to a deceased lieutenant, 2 armed guards rotating in 6-hour shifts, and a door that locked from the outside, a detail she noted aloud, without complaint, on her first night aboard. It was, she told Adama the next morning, entirely reasonable. It was also, she added, the first colonial custom she intended to write down in the small leather-bound journal she'd requested permission to keep, a request that had briefly confused the quartermaster more than anything else about her presence. You're taking notes, Adama said, when he found her in the officer's mess. Journal open beside an untouched ration of colonial protein paste she was examining with the polite caution of a scientist handling an unfamiliar compound. I am attempting to understand your people the way I would study a newly contacted civilization in any first contact scenario, Caprina said, though I confess this situation inverts the customary roles. Ordinarily, the technologically advanced party observes from a position of security. Here, I am the guest, and you hold every advantage of home terrain, even as I represent the more capable fleet. Feeling exposed, Commander? Feeling instructed, she said. It is a useful sensation. Vulcans value it. Adama allowed himself the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. He'd expected an alien diplomat to perform patience as a tactic. What he was getting, increasingly, felt like patience as a genuine disposition, which was either the most convincing performance he'd ever witnessed, or something rarer than he knew how to categorize. The true test of that patience arrived 3 hours later, when Sharon Valerie, call sign Boomer, one of Galactica's most decorated Raptor pilots, walked into the mess hall, saw Caprina seated at the far table, and went perfectly, unnaturally still. Nobody else noticed. Boomer recovered in less than 2 seconds, offered a polite nod toward the alien guest, and continued to the food line as if nothing had happened. But Chief Tyrol, 3 tables away and hopelessly, quietly in love with her, caught the flicker, the same flicker he'd learned, in the aftermath of a dozen betrayals across the fleet, to read as something other than ordinary nerves. He said nothing. Not yet. He told himself it was nothing. He had told himself that before about people who had turned out to be something else entirely, and the lie had cost the fleet dearly each time. Caprina, for her part, noted the pilot's reaction with the same clinical attention she gave everything aboard Galactica, filed it without comment, and returned to her protein paste. That afternoon, Adama convened a smaller meeting, himself, Ty Dr. Cottle, and President Laura Roslin, patched in via a secure channel from the passenger liner Colonial One, where the fragile civilian government of the surviving 12 colonies conducted what business it could from a converted cargo hold. Roslin's face, drawn and tired even through the grainy transmission, carried the particular weariness of a schoolteacher who had become the last constitutional authority for the remnant of a species, and who had learned to distrust good news as a matter of professional habit. So, Roslin said, once Adama had laid out the situation, a civilization with no apparent history of scarcity, offering unconditional aid, in the middle of a war against enemies who can look like anyone. She let the silence stretch. Bill, you understand why that description makes every hair on the back of my neck stand up. I understand it better than you know, Adama said. But I spent 2 days across a table from their representative, and either she's the single greatest liar I've ever met, or she's exactly what she claims to be, someone from a civilization that genuinely hasn't had to fight for survival the way we have, offering help because she can. That's not comforting, Bill. Naive isn't the opposite of dangerous. Sometimes it's a different flavor of the same thing. Agreed, Adama said, which is why I'm not proposing we trust them. I'm proposing we use them. Fuel, supplies, medical aid, all of it accepted, all of it verified independently before it goes anywhere near our reactors or sick bays. And in the meantime, we learn everything we can about this Federation, this Dominion War, and whether there's anywhere in this galaxy far enough from both that our people can finally stop running. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment. Behind her, through the grainy feed, Adama could see the shadow of Colonial One's cramped hold. Crates of the last supplies of a dying civilization stacked against the walls like the ribs of something no longer breathing properly. There's another possibility, Rosalind said finally. One I don't think either of us wants to say out loud. Say it anyway, Adama said. That's your job, Madam President. What if this Federation is exactly as good as it claims to be? What if, for the first time since the attacks, we found somewhere our people could actually live, not run to, not hide in, but live, and the only thing standing between our fleet and an actual future is our own inability to stop flinching at kindness? Nobody answered immediately. Ty looked away. Dr. Cottle, silent until now, finally spoke, his voice rough with the particular cynicism of a man who had stitched together too many bodies to believe easily in happy endings. With respect, Madam President, I've watched people die because we trusted the wrong smiling face. I'll take Bill's approach. Verify first. Hope later, if there's any left. I'm not suggesting blind faith, Doctor, Rosalind said. I'm suggesting we not let our trauma become the only lens through which we're capable of seeing the universe. That's its own kind of defeat. It was, Adama thought, the exact argument he needed someone else to make, precisely because he could never have afforded to make it himself. Command required suspicion. The presidency, apparently, still had room for hope. He was grateful, not for the first time, that the two of them had learned to occupy those different postures without either one collapsing the fleet's chances entirely. We'll proceed carefully, Adama said. Accept the aid. Keep Trina aboard, under guard, and let her keep talking to whoever she wants to talk to. If there's a trap here, I want to see its shape before it closes. The meeting ended, and Adama found himself an hour later, standing outside sickbay, watching through the observation window as Trina, with Dr. Cottle's grudging permission and two armed guards flanking the door, conducted what she called a baseline physiological comparison. Running a small Starfleet tricorder over a volunteer crewman's arm with the careful curiosity of a xenoanthropologist cataloging a species she found, despite herself, quietly remarkable. It was Chief Tyrol who finally broke his silence, catching Adama alone in the passageway outside. His voice was low, urgent, and carried the particular strain of a man about to say something he desperately hoped was nothing. Sir, it's probably nothing, but I need to report something about Lieutenant Valerie. Adama turned, and something in his gut, the same instinct that had kept his fleet alive through 4 years of running, went cold and still, the way it always did just before the universe reminded him that safety, in this life, was never more than temporary. Tell me, he said. Tyrol hesitated only a second before he did. Chief Tyrol's report was brief, halting, and delivered with the particular reluctance of a man informing on someone he loved. Sharon Valerie had reacted to Trini's presence, not with fear exactly, Tyrol clarified, but with a stillness he'd seen before in the moments right before Galactica had unmasked infiltrators in the past. A held breath, a too-perfect recovery. He hated himself for noticing it. He hated himself more for reporting it. Adama listened without interrupting, his face carved into the particular neutrality he reserved for information he could not yet afford to react to. You did the right thing telling me, Adama said when Tyrol finished. Say nothing to anyone else. Not Ty, not the lieutenant, not your bunkmates. I mean that, Chief. Yes, sir. Tyrol didn't move. Sir, permission to say something else. Adama nodded once. If it's true, if she's one of them, I don't know what that does to me. I've flown with her. He stopped himself before the sentence, when somewhere he wasn't ready to finish in front of his commanding officer. I just need you to know I reported it anyway. Noted, Chief. Dismissed. Adama did not go to Ty, not yet, and not to Rosalind either. Instead, an hour later, under the pretense of continuing their diplomatic conversation, he found himself once more across the observation lounge table from Trina, studying her with the particular intensity of a man deciding whether the thing sitting across from him might be the single greatest asset his fleet had stumbled into, or the instrument of its final unraveling. "Commander," T'Prina said, noting his expression immediately. In the unervingly perceptive way, she seemed to notice everything. "You appear troubled by something beyond our previous conversation. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Even if the honest answer is one I won't like, I will answer as honestly as I am able. Does the Federation or anyone allied with it have any technology, biological, psionic, technological, anything, that could detect whether a person who believes themselves human is, in fact, something else? Something built to look, think, and bleed exactly like the people around them?" T'Prina's expression did not change, but something in the quality of her stillness sharpened. The recalibration of a mind encountering a question it had not expected and immediately recognized as important. "You are asking whether your own people might unknowingly harbor infiltrators among the colonial population itself, not merely from external contact. I'm asking whether you can help us find out." Quietly, the Federation has extensive experience diagnosing founder infiltration among our own ranks, given the Dominion's use of shape-shifting agents, T'Prina said. Standard Starfleet blood screening can detect changeling biology reliably. However, if your adversary's method of mimicry is fundamentally different, biological rather than shape-shifting, for instance, constructed rather than transformed, our existing diagnostic protocols may prove entirely inadequate. I would need far more information about the nature of your silence before I could offer any confidence in a solution. "And if I told you," Adama said slowly, "that some of them don't know themselves, that they believe completely, that they're human, memories, emotions, loyalty, everything, until the moment something wakes them up." For the first time since her arrival, T'Prina went entirely silent, the particular silence of someone confronting an idea that troubled her not tactically, but philosophically. "That," she said finally, "would represent a form of psychological warfare more insidious than anything the Dominion has yet employed against us. The Founders know what they are. Your silence, by your description, may not. That is a violation not merely of trust, Commander, but of personhood itself, theirs as much as yours." It was, Adama thought, an oddly compassionate response for a moment that had nothing at all to do with compassion, and it told him something important about T'Prina, whatever else she might be. She had heard a description of his fleet's deepest nightmare, and her first instinct had not been fear for herself, but a kind of sorrow for the deceived. "I have a name," Adama said finally. "Lieutenant Sharon Valerie, one of my best pilots, for years of exemplary service. No history, no red flags, nothing. Except that in the last 2 days, more than one member of my crew has noticed her reacting to your presence the way we've learned silence, sometimes react to things that threaten their cover. You wish me to examine her. I wish you to tell me if there's any way to know for certain, without destroying an innocent woman's life over a hunch or missing a threat because we were too polite to look." T'Prina considered this for a long moment. "I can offer a preliminary genetic and cellular analysis using Starfleet medical equipment I have brought aboard. It will not be conclusive if your Cylons are constructed from human genetic material with no artificial markers, which, if your description of their psychological fidelity is accurate, seems likely. But it may reveal anomalies your own medical technology has not been calibrated to detect. I would need Dr. Cottle's cooperation and Lieutenant Valerie's consent, or a legitimate medical pretext that does not reveal our suspicion." "Leave the pretext to me," Adama said. The examination took place the following day. Disguised as a routine post-deployment physical, standard procedure, Cottle assured Boomer with the gruff, unbothered efficiency that made him the least suspicious person aboard Galactica to conduct exactly this kind of subterfuge. T'Prina stood at the periphery of sickbay, ostensibly observing Federation and colonial medical practices for her diplomatic notes, quietly running a hand scanner over readings Cottle fed her under the guise of comparing equipment calibration. Boomer, for her part, showed no sign of distress beyond the ordinary discomfort of any pilot subjected to an unscheduled physical. She joked with Cottle about his bedside manner. She asked T'Prina, with what seemed like genuine curiosity, what Vulcan childhood was like, whether they had games, whether they missed home the way she missed Caprica sometimes, in the specific ache of a dream she couldn't quite remember on waking. It was, Adama reflected later, reviewing Trina's report in the privacy of his quarters, one of the most unbearable ironies he had encountered in 4 years of unbearable ironies. If Sharon Valerie was a Cylon, she was, by every measure available to them, also entirely herself, a woman who loved flying, missed a homeworld she might never have actually lived on, and had shown nothing but loyalty and skill in the service of a fleet that might, at any moment, learn to fear her without cause or with every cause in the world. Trina's report, when it came, offered no clean answer. Cellular structure consistent with baseline human physiology. No anomalous energy signatures. No indication of artificial construction detectable by Federation medical science. And yet, a footnote, added with the particular carefulness of a scientist unwilling to overstate incomplete data, trace bioelectric patterns in neural scans that did not perfectly match the baseline distribution Trina had recorded from a dozen other colonial crew members used as comparison samples. Not conclusive. Not nothing. What does that mean? Adama asked when Trina delivered the findings personally. In terms I can actually use? It means, Commander, that I cannot tell you whether Lieutenant Valerie is human, Cylon, or something your own people have not yet found the vocabulary to describe. It means the mimicry your enemy has achieved may be sophisticated enough to evade even instruments built specifically to detect deception in a civilization at war with masters of impersonation. Trina paused. And it means, if I may offer an observation beyond the clinical, that if she is what you fear, she does not know it. Whatever moves inside her, waiting, it is not yet awake. Whatever choice she ultimately makes, when and if it wakes, may still be hers to make. Adama said nothing for a long moment, staring at the readout that offered no comfort in either direction. Not innocence, not guilt, just the terrible, familiar uncertainty that had haunted his fleet since the day the colonies burned. Keep this between us, he said finally. Watch her. Don't confront her. Not yet. And if she is a threat, Commander, if the moment comes, and there is no time for caution. Adama's answer came slower this time, weighted with 4 years of decisions no commander should have had to make twice, let alone endlessly, in fleet after fleet, crew after crew, friend after friend. Then I'll do what I've always done, he said. What has to be done, but not before I have to. Not one moment before I have to. Outside the small observation window of his quarters, the strange, unfamiliar stars of a galaxy his people had never charted burned on, indifferent to the small, human tragedy unfolding beneath them. A tragedy that, Trina noted privately in her journal that evening, bore an uncomfortable resemblance to a war her own galaxy was still fighting, against enemies who could wear anyone's face, including, perhaps, the face of someone who did not yet know she wore one at all. Word travels strangely in a war zone, not through official channels first, but through the 1,000 small leaks that accumulate around any large military operation. A supply officer's offhand comment relayed up a chain of command. A sensor technician's report flagged for unusual readings. A Starfleet intelligence analyst noticing a pattern nobody had thought to hide carefully enough. Within 4 days of Galactica's arrival, the existence of a refugee fleet carrying viable nuclear ordnance had stopped being a secret and started being a strategic consideration in offices far from the Bellerophon's bridge. Captain Vecma received the inquiry first, routed through Starfleet Command with a particular urgency reserved for matters that made admirals nervous. Asterisk confirm reports. Refugee fleet designated Colonial possesses functional nuclear warheads. Assess feasibility of technology sharing or acquisition, given current wartime resource constraints. Priority, high asterisk. Vecma read the message twice before forwarding it to Trina with a single line appended. Asterisk, handle this delicately. I don't want us to be the reason these people regret trusting us. Asterisk. Trina, aboard Galactica when the message reached her, found herself in the uncomfortable position of representing an institution whose interests had just shifted, subtly but unmistakably, from humanitarian aid toward something closer to a strategic opportunity. She requested a private meeting with Adama that evening, and delivered the news with the same unflinching honesty she had offered from their first conversation. Starfleet Command is aware of your fleet's nuclear capability, she said. They have not yet made any request. But I judge it likely, given the pressures of the war, that such a request is forthcoming. I felt you deserved to know before it arrived, rather than be surprised by it. Adama's expression didn't change, but something in his posture went very still. The specific stillness of a man who had been waiting, without quite admitting it to himself, for the moment when Federation goodwill would reveal its price after all. "There it is," he said quietly. "Commander, I want to be precise about what has and has not happened. No demand has been made. No threat has been implied. I am relaying the existence of institutional interest, not an ultimatum. Interest has a way of becoming an ultimatum when the war's going badly enough," Adama said. "How badly is it going, Commander? You've been dancing around specifics since the day you came aboard." Trina considered this, and then, for the first time, chose full candor over careful diplomacy. "Badly enough that Starfleet has authorized tactics and alliances that would have been unthinkable 4 years ago. Badly enough that officers I respect have made choices in the name of victory that I believe will haunt the conscience of the Federation for a generation, regardless of the war's outcome. I tell you this not to alarm you, but because you asked, and because I believe you have earned honesty rather than reassurance." It was, Adama thought, the most human thing she'd said to him, yet an admission of doubt about her own government, offered freely, without calculation. Cylons, in his experience, did not doubt their own cause. They believed with the terrible, unshakable certainty of zealots. Whatever Trina was, she carried the specific weight of someone who loved something imperfect and was honest about its imperfections. It didn't prove anything, but it mattered. "If they ask," Adama said, "the answer is no. Those warheads are the only leverage a fleet with no army and no homeworld has left. I won't hand that away to anyone, not for fuel, not for shelter, not for a war that isn't ours. I understand your position, Commander, and will represent it accurately." The request, when it came 3 days later, arrived not from Trina, but from a Starfleet admiral named Nechayev, transmitted directly to Galactica via a secured channel, with none of Trina's careful diplomacy softening its edges. Nechayev's face on the view screen was sharp, impatient, the face of someone who had spent a war learning to see civilians and refugees primarily as resources to be allocated efficiently. "Commander Adama," Nechayev said, without preamble, "I understand your fleet possesses fission and thermonuclear ordnance of a design incompatible with, but functionally comparable to, weapons technology from Federation history predating warp travel. I'm not going to waste your time or mine pretending this is a social call. The Federation is engaged in a war we are, at present, not winning as decisively as we would like. Weapons that operate on principles the Dominion shields and sensors may not be calibrated to anticipate could represent a meaningful tactical advantage. I am formally requesting access to your arsenal, or, at minimum, the specifications necessary to replicate it." Behind Adama, Ty's jaw tightened. Roslin, patched in from Colonial One, went very quiet in the specific way that meant she was choosing her words with unusual care. "Admiral," Adama said, "I appreciate your directness, so I'll return it. Those weapons are the last deterrent standing between my fleet and complete annihilation, should the enemy that's been hunting us for 4 years ever find us again. I will not surrender them, share their design, or diminish their number for any war, any alliance, or any cause that is not my own people's survival." "I understand this is difficult to hear, Commander, but I would remind you that the aid your fleet has received, fuel, medical support, safe harbor near a Federation starbase, has not been without cost to us either. Resources committed to your people are resources not committed elsewhere in a war effort that is, at this moment, costing thousands of lives." It was, Adama recognized immediately, the exact move he had been braced for since the moment Trina's shuttle first touched down on Galactica's deck. Kindness revealed, at last, as a debt quietly accruing interest. "Then take your fuel back," Adama said, voice flat and final. "Take your medical supplies back, if that's what this is. My fleet has survived unless. We will not survive selling the one thing standing between us, an extinction to pay for someone else's war." Nechayev's expression flickered, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. The recalibration of someone who had expected negotiation and received refusal instead. Commander, I don't believe you understand the position you're in. You are a fleet of civilian ships and one aging warship, alone in space you do not understand, dependent on Federation goodwill for continued survival. I would think carefully before. Admiral. Trini's voice cut in, unexpected and unauthorized, from a secondary comm channel Adama hadn't realized was open. With respect, this line of argument does not reflect Federation values, nor does it reflect the spirit of the aid this fleet was offered. I would remind you that coercion disguised as negotiation is not diplomacy. It is the very tactic we accuse the Dominion of employing against weaker powers. The silence that followed was total. Nechayev's gaze shifted, sharp and assessing, toward the unseen source of the interruption. Lieutenant Commander Trina, I was not aware you had inserted yourself into this channel. I have been assigned as liaison to Commander Adama's fleet, Admiral, and I consider clarifying Federation intent within my mandate. I do not believe threatening a traumatized refugee population's sole means of self-defense, in exchange for aid already extended freely, represents a position Starfleet Command would wish publicly attributed to it. Adama watched with something between alarm and a fierce, unexpected gratitude, as a junior Vulcan officer effectively accused a Starfleet admiral of coercion on an open channel, in defense of a fleet she had known for less than a week. Nechayev's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your candor is noted, Lieutenant Commander. We will discuss your conduct separately. She turned back to the screen, and when she spoke again, her tone had cooled into something more careful, more aware of being observed. Commander Adama, I withdraw the request in its current framing. The Federation will not condition humanitarian aid on military cooperation. I would, however, extend an invitation, not a demand, for future dialogue regarding mutual defense, should your fleet choose to remain in this region long-term. Noted Admiral, Adama said. We'll think about it. On our own time. The channel closed. For a long moment, nobody in Galactica's CIC spoke. Then Tai, arms crossed, broke the silence with a particular dry understatement that had carried the two of them through worse crises than this one. Well, he said, that's the first time I've ever seen anyone from the other side stick their neck out for us before we asked them to. Adama said nothing, but his gaze drifted to the comm panel, still faintly warm from a transmission, and to the woman on the other end of it who had just risked her career, and possibly more, defending a fleet of strangers from her own government's ambitions. He still didn't fully trust her. He suspected, increasingly, that he might be wrong not to. Commander Adama, Nechayev said without preamble, I understand your fleet possesses fission and thermonuclear ordnance of a design incompatible with, but functionally comparable to, weapons technology from Federation history predating warp travel. I'm not going to waste your time or mine pretending this is a social call. The Federation is engaged in a war we are, at present, not winning as decisively as we would like. Weapons that operate on principles the Dominion shields and sensors may not be calibrated to anticipate could represent a meaningful tactical advantage. I am formally requesting access to your arsenal, or, at minimum, the specifications necessary to replicate it. Behind Adama, Ty's jaw tightened. Roslyn, patched in from Colonial One, went very quiet in the specific way that meant she was choosing her words with unusual care. Admiral, Adama said, I appreciate your directness, so I'll return it. Those weapons are the last deterrent standing between my fleet and complete annihilation, should the enemy that's been hunting us for 4 years ever find us again. I will not surrender them, share their design, or diminish their number for any war, any alliance, or any cause that is not my own people's survival. I understand this is difficult to hear, Commander, but I would remind you that the aid your fleet has received, fuel, medical support, safe harbored near a Federation starbase, has not been without cost to us either. Resources committed to your people are resources not committed elsewhere in a war effort that is, at this moment, costing thousands of lives. It was Adama recognized immediately. The exact move he had been braced for since the moment Trini's shuttle first touched down on Galactica's deck. Kindness revealed, at last, as a debt quietly accruing interest. Then take your fuel back, Adama said, voice flat and final. Take your medical supplies back if that's what this is. My fleet has survived on less. We will not survive selling the one thing standing between us and extinction to pay for someone else's war. Nechayev's expression flickered, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, the recalibration of someone who had expected negotiation and received refusal instead. Commander, I don't believe you understand the position you're in. You are a fleet of civilian ships and one aging warship, alone in space you do not understand, dependent on Federation goodwill for continued survival. I would think carefully before. Admiral. Tprini's voice cut in, unexpected and unauthorized, from a secondary comm channel Adama hadn't realized was open. With respect, this line of argument does not reflect Federation values, nor does it reflect the spirit of the aid this fleet was offered. I would remind you that coercion disguised as negotiation is not diplomacy. It is the very tactic we accuse the Dominion of employing against weaker powers. The silence that followed was total. Nechayev's gaze shifted, sharp and assessing, toward the unseen source of the interruption. Lieutenant Commander Tprina, I was not aware you had inserted yourself into this channel. I have been assigned as liaison to Commander Adama's fleet, Admiral, and I consider clarifying Federation intent within my mandate. I do not believe threatening a traumatized refugee population's sole means of self-defense, in exchange for aid already extended freely, represents a position Starfleet Command would wish publicly attributed to it. Adama watched, with something between alarm and a fierce, unexpected gratitude, as a junior Vulcan officer effectively accused a Starfleet admiral of coercion on an open channel, in defense of a fleet she had known for less than a week. Nechayev's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your candor is noted, Lieutenant Commander. We will discuss your conduct separately. She turned back to the screen, and when she spoke again, her tone had cooled into something more careful, more aware of being observed. Commander Adama, I withdraw the request in its current framing. The Federation will not condition humanitarian aid on military cooperation. I would, however, extend an invitation, not a demand, for future dialogue regarding mutual defense, should your fleet choose to remain in this region long-term. Noted Admiral, Adama said. We'll think about it. On our own time. The channel closed. For a long moment, nobody in Galactica's CIC spoke. Then Tai, arms crossed, broke the silence with a particular dry understatement that had carried the two of them through worse crises than this one. Well, he said, that's the first time I've ever seen anyone from the other side stick their neck out for us before we asked them to. Adama said nothing, but his gaze drifted to the comm panel, still faintly warm from the transmission, and to the woman on the other end of it who had just risked her career, and possibly more, defending a fleet of strangers from her own government's ambitions. He still didn't fully trust her. He suspected, increasingly, that he might be wrong not to. The Klingon warbird, no, corrected Adama's memory of the intelligence briefing Tprina had provided. A bird of prey, distinct from the cloaked Romulan vessels of similar name, decloaked less than 50,000 kilometers from Galactica's flank without warning, without hail, and without the faintest gesture toward the diplomatic protocol Tprina had spent the last week carefully teaching Colonial Command to expect from Starfleet vessels. Dradi's contact, the tactical officer shouted. And for one gut-clenching second, the entire CIC braced for the opening salvo of an attack neither the Federation nor the Silence had prepared them for. No weapons fired. Instead, a communication request blared through on an open frequency, translated in real time by a small comm-badge device. Tprina had insisted Adama's communications officer keep active at all times. A courtesy, she'd said, in case contact came from a party less patient than the Federation. Battlestar Galactica. A voice boomed, thick with an accent that turned every syllable into something closer to a challenge than a greeting. Asterisk. This is Captain Kroval of the IKS CH Tang. I have heard you carry warriors capable of flying without the aid of your primitive drive systems. I wish to see if this is true, or if the Federation exaggerates the courage of its new pets to make itself look generous. Asterisk. In the CIC, Ty's expression curdled into something between offense and reluctant amusement. Pets, he repeated. Adama, for his part, felt something he hadn't expected in days of careful diplomatic maneuvering. The sudden, clarifying relief of an insult he knew exactly how to answer. "Give me Starbuck," he said. Kara Thrace arrived on the CIC floor within minutes, flight suit half-zipped, hair still damp from a shower cut short, radiating the particular energy of a pilot who had heard the word Klingon and challenge in the same sentence, and had not needed a third word to know she was interested. "Sir, please tell me this is what I think it is. Captain Crovell of the CH Tang wants to know if colonial pilots have anything resembling actual skill," Adama said, or words to that effect. Starbuck's grin was immediate, sharp, and entirely without diplomacy. "I volunteer as tribute." Trina, monitoring the exchange from her now customary seat at the edge of the CIC, allowed herself the smallest furrow of concern. "Commander, I feel obligated to note that Klingon challenges of this nature, while a serious component of their honor culture, occasionally escalate beyond the participants' original intentions. Captain Crovell's ship carries disruptor cannons, substantially more powerful than anything your Viper's weapon systems could survive in an actual engagement." "Nobody said anything about an actual engagement," Adama said. "Commander Trina, would I be correct in assuming Klingon respect displays of skill more than displays of firepower?" "That is broadly accurate, yes." "Then we'll give them a display of skill." Adama activated the comm Captain Crovell. "This is Commander Adama. My pilots would be happy to demonstrate colonial flight capability in a controlled exercise, not a live engagement. I assume Klingon honor permits a contest of maneuver rather than a contest of destruction." There was a pause, filled with what might have been a low, considering growl on the other end of the channel. "A contest of maneuver," Crovell repeated, as if tasting the concept and finding it thinner than he preferred, but not without merit. Asterisk, "Very well, Commander. My pilot against yours. First to complete 3 passes through the debris field at the edge of this system, without triggering a collision alert wins the contest. If your pilot survives with skill worth respecting, I will consider it worth my time to have decloaked today." Asterisk. "And if she doesn't win?" Adama asked. Asterisk. "Then I will know the Federation's new friends are exactly as fragile as their little fleet suggests, and I will lose interest in wasting further attention on you." Asterisk. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Klingon diplomacy, Trina had explained days earlier, operated on a currency of demonstrated worth rather than diplomatic nicety, and a fleet unable to demonstrate any worth beyond victimhood risked being dismissed, or worse, targeted, as an easy resource rather than a respected neighbor. "Starbuck," Adama said, "you heard the man." "Already heading to my bird, sir." The debris field in question was a shattered remnant of a long-destroyed moon, a churning maze of rock and ice fragments large enough to demand real piloting and small enough to make any mistake instantly, spectacularly fatal. Crovell's pilot, a young, scarred Klingon named Torvek, flying a sleek bird of prey shuttle, with weapons stripped for the exercise, took the first pass with brutal, confident aggression, threading the debris with the kind of reckless bravado that assumed the universe would move out of his way before he had to. Starbuck watched the telemetry from her Viper's cockpit, running silent calculations that had nothing to do with bravado and everything to do with 4 years of flying combat sorties against an enemy that never, ever gave her a fair fight. "Command, Starbuck," she said over comms. "Watch this." Her first pass wasn't fast. It was precise, a corkscrewing arc through the tightest cluster of debris that made Torvek's aggressive straight-line thread look, by comparison, like brute force dressed up as skill. Her second pass added a deliberate stall and recover maneuver through a gap barely wider than her Viper's wingspan, a move that drew an audible intake of breath from more than one officer in Galactica's CIC. By her third pass, she wasn't just completing the course, she was doing it while inverted, using the Viper's maneuvering thrusters in a combination colonial flight instructors had spent years insisting was theoretically possible and practically suicidal. She crossed the finish marker 4 seconds ahead of Torvek's third pass, without a single collision alert, and without, Trina noted with something like genuine fascination, using more than 60% of her fuel reserves, an economy of resource use that suggested the maneuver had been executed with far more control than raw daring. The channel was silent for a long moment. Then Crowell's voice returned, and this time the growl beneath it carried something different, not disappointment, but the grudging, unmistakable weight of respect earned rather than given. Asterisk. Your pilot flies like she has spent her entire life running from something faster and more numerous than herself, and has decided that this makes her more dangerous, not less. Asterisk. A pause. Asterisk. I find that I approve, Commander Adama. Perhaps your little fleet is not merely fortunate to still exist. Perhaps it has earned its survival. Asterisk. She's been doing that for 4 years, Captain, Adama said. Every one of my pilots has. Asterisk. Then perhaps we have more to discuss than the Federation's diplomats have led me to expect. Asterisk. Something in Crowell's tone shifted, the challenge giving way cautiously to something like genuine interest. Asterisk. Tell me, Commander, does your fleet's warrior code permit alliance with those who value combat honestly won over combat avoided through cleverness? Because I confess myself curious whether colonial warriors fight as well with weapons as your pilot flies without them. Asterisk. It was, Adama recognized, an opening, not friendship exactly, and not the careful institutional diplomacy the Federation had offered, but something rawer and in some ways more valuable. The possibility of respect from a culture that measured worth in demonstrated capability rather than declared intention. The Klingon Empire wanted nothing from his fleet's fuel reserves or nuclear arsenal. It wanted only proof that colonial warriors were worth knowing. Captain Crowell, Adama said, choosing his words with the particular care of a man aware that he was, for the first time since the Battlestar Galactica, had fallen through the fabric of an unfamiliar reality, being offered a relationship built on something other than either charity or leverage. I think my fleet would be very interested in continuing this conversation. Behind him, Starbuck's Viper looped once, triumphantly, through the wreckage of a debris field, and even Tai, sour, suspicious Tai, who trusted nothing and no one on principle, allowed himself something dangerously close to a smile. The Klingon overture, promising as it was, did nothing to resolve the question that had been quietly eating at Adama since T'Prin's inconclusive scan of Sharon Valerie, a question that came to a head 4 days later, in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. It began with a malfunction. A minor one, at first, a fluctuation in Galactica's aging FTL drive controllers, the kind of glitch that in ordinary circumstances would have meant nothing more than a maintenance order and a muttered curse from the engineering deck. But Chief Tyrol, running diagnostics with the particular thoroughness of a man who had learned never to dismiss small anomalies, found something buried in the drive's command log that made his blood run cold. An unauthorized access attempt, routed through a terminal that Boomer had logged into less than an hour before her last patrol. He didn't go to Adama first this time. He went to Tai, because Tai was closer, and because some part of him, the part still hopelessly, uselessly in love with a woman he was increasingly terrified was not entirely a woman at all, needed one more person to tell him he was wrong before he let this become real. Tai did not tell him he was wrong. Within the hour, Adama, Tai, T'Prina, and a visibly shaken Tyrol were gathered in Adama's quarters, the access logs spread across his desk like evidence at a trial nobody wanted to conduct. She accessed drive command protocols she has no operational reason to touch, Tai said, voice flat with the particular anger of a man who had trusted someone and was furious at himself for it. Command level authorization. If she'd completed whatever she was trying to do, she could have stranded this entire fleet. No FTL. No way to jump if the Cylons ever find us here. Or, T'Prina said carefully, she attempted a legitimate diagnostic that the log has recorded incompletely, and we are constructing a narrative of guilt from an ambiguous data trail, because guilt is the narrative we have learned, through painful experience, to expect. With respect, Commander, Tai snapped, you haven't lived through what we have. You don't get to lecture us on giving her the benefit of the doubt. I am not lecturing you, Colonel. I am cautioning against a specific failure mode I have observed in my own service, the tendency, under sufficient stress, to mistake pattern matching for certainty. I do not know that Lieutenant Valerie is innocent. I equally do not know that she is not. I am asking that we act on evidence, not fear, because fear has a documented tendency to manufacture the very outcomes it dreads. Adama, silent through most of the exchange, finally spoke. Where is she now? Quarters, Tyrol said. Off duty. She doesn't know we found the log. Keep it that way. Adama's voice carried the particular weight of a decision he clearly hated making. Colonel, I want 2 Marines outside her quarters. Quiet, no visible weapons, positioned to look routine. If she's innocent, I won't have her humiliated in front of the crew before we know for certain. If she's not. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. It was Starbuck, arriving unannounced 20 minutes later with the particular fury of someone who had heard rumors traveling faster than official channels could contain them, who forced the situation to a head far sooner than Adama had planned. Is it true? She demanded, bursting into the room without knocking, eyes blazing. Are you actually about to arrest Boomer over a maintenance log? Kara, Adama started. No, you don't get to Kara me right now. I've flown with her for 4 years. I've bled next to her. If you're about to throw her in the brig because some Vulcan science experiment couldn't rule her out with 100% certainty, then I want to know right now, because I am not going to stand by and watch this fleet eat one of its own again. Lieutenant, T'Prina said, with a calm that somehow cut through Starbuck's anger more effectively than a raised voice could have, I share your concern for due process. It is, in fact, the position I have been advocating for the last 20 minutes. May I propose an alternative to both arrest and inaction? Starbuck's glare shifted, wary but listening. I'm listening. A control test, T'Prina said. Not an accusation, not an arrest, a genuine diagnostic scenario, framed as a training exercise that would require Lieutenant Valerie to demonstrate the exact drive access sequence recorded in the log under observation, with an explanation solicited naturally rather than under duress. If her actions were innocent, a legitimate diagnostic, a training exercise, a misremembered protocol. This will reveal it without the accusation ever needing to be spoken aloud. If they are not, she paused, then we will learn that also, but in a controlled setting, rather than a confrontation that could turn violent or force a premature revelation neither we nor she may be prepared for. Adama looked at Starbuck, then at Ty, then finally at Tyrol, whose face had gone the particular gray of a man watching the 2 possible futures of his life narrow toward a single unbearable point. Set it up, Adama said. Kara, you'll fly with her. If it comes to it, I want someone in that cockpit who trusts her enough to give her every chance to prove herself innocent, and enough skill to survive if she's not. That's not fair to ask of me, Starbuck said quietly. No, Adama agreed. It isn't. I'm asking anyway, because there's no one on this ship better suited to it, and because I think you'd rather be the one in that seat than have someone else make that call without you. Starbuck held his gaze for a long moment, some private battle resolving itself behind her eyes, and finally nodded. Once, sharp and final. The exercise was staged the following morning, ostensibly a routine dual-pilot diagnostic run of Galactica's auxiliary FTL relay systems, requiring Boomer to input the exact authorization sequence recorded in the previous night's log, under the watchful, apparently casual observation of Starbuck in the co-pilot seat and T'Prina monitoring remotely via a discreetly positioned sensor relay. Boomer performed the sequence without hesitation, without a flicker of the strange stillness Tyrol had reported days earlier, right up until the final authorization step, a command string that, according to T'Prina's analysis, diverged subtly from standard colonial protocol in a pattern that suggested either a silent backdoor command or an innocent variant Boomer might have picked up during an unlogged systems update months earlier. Her hand hovered over the final keystroke and stopped. Sharon, Starbuck said carefully, watching her friend's face go pale and distant, eyes fixed on the console like it had become something other than metal and light. Boomer, talk to me. I don't. Boomer's voice cracked, thin and frightened in a way that no performance could have manufactured. I don't know why I know this sequence. I've never seen this before. But my hands know it, Kara. My hands know exactly what comes next, and I don't know how. It was, T'Prina noted later in her journal, the precise, terrible moment predicted by every theoretical model of deep cover infiltration she had studied during the war, the sleeper agent's own consciousness confronting evidence of its true nature before the agent itself had any framework to process what that evidence meant. Whatever Sharon Valerie believed herself to be, some deeper architecture within her had just answered a question her conscious mind had never known to ask. Starbuck didn't hesitate. She reached across the cockpit, gripped her friend's shaking hand before it could complete the sequence, and held it there, refusing to let the moment resolve itself into either confession or catastrophe. "Then we don't finish it," Starbuck said, fierce and immediate. "Whatever you are, whatever's in there, you didn't choose it, Sharon. You hear me? Nobody gets to make you into a weapon without your permission, not even yourself." It was not a solution. It was not even, by any strict military logic, the safest available choice. But it was, Adama would reflect later, watching the recording of the exercise with grim, complicated relief, exactly the choice his fleet needed to make in that moment, not the choice of a people who had given up on trust entirely, but the choice of people who had learned, through unbearable loss, to fight for it anyway, one impossible decision at a time. The Dominion ambush came 11 days later, and it came exactly the way Trina had warned it might, not aimed at the Federation's war effort directly, but at the fragile, unprecedented alliance quietly forming around a fleet of refugees with weapons the Founders' intelligence apparatus had, by now, thoroughly catalogued and thoroughly feared. It began with 3 Jem'Hadar attack ships dropping out of warp at the edge of the system, where Galactica's fleet had taken up cautious residence alongside a small Federation Klingon escort force, Vecma's Bellerophon, Krovel's CH Tang, and 2 additional vessels dispatched after Nechaev's grudging acknowledgement that a fleet capable of impressing both a Vulcan diplomat and a Klingon warrior might be worth actual protection rather than mere opportunistic extraction. Multiple contacts, decloaking, Galactica's tactical officer called out, and this time there was no ambiguity, no diplomatic hesitation. Weapons fire lit the void within seconds, plasma torpedoes screaming toward the Bellerophon's shields with the merciless efficiency of soldiers bred for exactly this purpose and nothing else. "Sir," Gator reported, voice tight, Federation ships taking heavy damage. Shields down to 60% and falling. Adama didn't hesitate. For years of running from an enemy with no mercy had taught him exactly one unbreakable lesson. Hesitation killed more people than boldness ever had. Launch all Vipers. Tie, arm point defense batteries. If they want to fight, we've had 4 years of practice. Sir, our nuclear ordnance is a last resort, not our opening move, Adama said. Conventional weapons only unless I say otherwise. I'm not handing the Dominion evidence that would justify escalating this war against my own fleet. Starbuck's Viper wings screamed into the fray within 90 seconds, and for the first time since falling into this galaxy, colonial pilots found themselves fighting not to survive a hopeless pursuit, but to protect something, someone, that had chosen, however cautiously, to stand beside them. "Command, Starbuck, I've got 2 Jem'Hadar fighters bearing on the CH Tang's aft shields, moving to intercept." Her wing tore through the Jem'Hadar formation with the same brutal precision she'd shown in the debris field days earlier. Except now the stakes weren't a Klingon captain's approval, but a Klingon captain's survival. Krovel's voice crackled over the shared tactical channel a moment later, thick with fury and something that might have been the beginning of genuine camaraderie. Asterisk, colonial pilot, that intercept saved my ship. The Empire remembers debts of this kind. Asterisk, pay me back by not dying, Captain. Starbuck shot back, already peeling off toward her next target. Aboard Galactica, Trina stood at the edge of the CIC, technically a civilian observer with no combat role, watching the battle unfold across a dozen screens with the focused intensity of someone cataloging every tactical decision for lessons she intended to carry back to Starfleet Command, assuming any of them survived to make the report. It was Boomer, cleared for limited duty after the incident with the drive relay, flying reconnaissance rather than combat at Adama's explicit, careful order, who spotted the 4th Jem'Hadar ship, the one that hadn't decloaked with the others, the one holding position at the system's edge with weapons charged and targeting solution locked not on any military vessel, but on the slow, lumbering shape of the civilian transport Gideon, carrying nearly 4,000 colonial refugees with no shields, no weapons, and no chance of surviving a direct hit. CIC, this is Boomer. I've got a fourth contact, hidden behind the outer debris ring, targeting the Gideon. I say again, they're going for the civilians. The Gideon was too far from Galactica's point defense envelope, too far from any Viper wing currently engaged elsewhere in the battle. The math in the brutal, unforgiving arithmetic of 4 years of running from genocide did not favor a rescue in time. Colonel Ty, Adama said, voice suddenly, terribly calm in the way it only became when the cost of a decision had already been counted and accepted. Signal the fleet. All ships, minimum safe distance from the Gideon's projected debris field. We may be about to lose her. It was Trina, not Starfleet protocol, not Klingon honor, but a Vulcan diplomat with no formal combat authority and every reason to stay silent, who broke the moment open. Commander, the Bellerophon retains transporter capability, even under partial shield failure, at short range. If Captain Vecma can bring his vessel within transport range of the Gideon within the next 90 seconds, we could beam a significant portion of her population directly to Federation and Klingon vessels before impact. 90 seconds isn't enough time to evacuate 4,000 people, Adama said. No, Trina agreed, already keying the frequency to relay the request to Vecma directly. It is not enough time to save everyone. It is enough time to save some. I do not offer this as a solution, Commander. I offer it because the alternative is saving no one at all, and I have found in this war that partial victory against certain loss is still victory worth pursuing. Adama's jaw tightened, the specific, unbearable calculus of command settling over him like a physical weight. Do it. What followed was chaos rendered into something almost like grace. Vecma's Bellerophon, shields failing, hull scored by weapons fire, closing to point-blank transport range of a ship it had no formal obligation to save, beaming refugees aboard in staggered groups of 6, even as Jem'Hadar plasma fired tore gouges across her already battered hull. Kroval C.H. Tang, without being asked, peeled away from its own engagement to lay covering fire across the Bellerophon's exposed flank, buying precious extra seconds neither ship could really afford to spend. 211 people came off the Gideon before the Jem'Hadar's third torpedo found her unshielded hull, and the ship became a bright, brief scar of light against the void. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But 211 people who would have died were, instead, standing shell-shocked and alive in the Bellerophon's transporter room, and Adama, watching the tactical display go dark where the Gideon had been, understood with sudden, complete clarity something he had not fully let himself believe until this exact moment. Whatever the Federation was, whatever calculations of war and interest had brought them here, Vecma's ship had just nearly died to save strangers with no formal claim on his loyalty, for no reason beyond the fact that saving them had been possible. The battle turned 20 minutes later, when Kroval's reinforcement arrived, a second bird of prey, and unexpectedly, a Romulan warbird that decloaked without warning and without explanation, opening fire on the remaining Jem'Hadar vessels with the cold, opportunistic precision of an empire that had decided, for reasons of its own, that a Dominion defeat here served its interests better than Dominion victory. The Jem'Hadar broke and fled within minutes, their tactical advantage erased by numbers they had not anticipated encountering. In the aftermath, across the wreckage-strewn silence of the system, Adama stood on Galactica's observation deck beside Trina, watching rescue shuttles, ferry survivors between ships that, 11 days ago, had been strangers to one another and were now bound by the specific, unbreakable debt of blood spent in mutual defense. 211, Adama said quietly, out of nearly 4,000. I am sorry, Commander. I wish the mathematics had permitted a better outcome. They didn't, Adama said. But Vecma tried anyway. Your Klingon friend tried anyway. He was quiet for a long moment. For years, I've been telling my people that trust gets you killed, that the only safe assumption is betrayal. And today, I watched a species I met less than 2 weeks ago nearly die trying to save people who owed them nothing. Does this change your assessment of us, Commander? Adama's answer came slowly, weighted with the particular exhaustion of a man recalculating a worldview he had built, brick by brick, out of necessary paranoia. It doesn't erase 4 years of good reasons to trust no one. But it's the first time since the colonies burned that I've had to seriously consider the possibility that paranoia might cost my people a future worth having, as surely as trust might cost them their lives. Behind them, in the transporter room 3 decks below, Sharon Valerie worked alongside Federation medical staff without hesitation, tending to frightened, wounded survivors with the same steady competence she brought to every mission. Whatever slept inside her, still unclaimed and unclaiming, choosing, in this moment at least, to be exactly the person she had always believed herself to be. The council convened 3 days after the battle, in a hastily arranged meeting aboard Deep Space Nine itself. Adama and Roslin representing the colonial fleet, Vecma and Nechayev for Starfleet, Kroval speaking for the Klingon Empire, and, unexpectedly, a Romulan subcommander named Talus, whose government had apparently decided that an opportunistic rescue was worth following up with an equally opportunistic diplomatic overture. Adama had not wanted to come, for years of instinct told him that rooms full of powerful strangers negotiating a fleet's future rarely ended with that fleet better off than when it started. But Roslin had insisted, and T'Prina, present at Adama's specific request, an advisor now rather than merely a diplomat under guard, had made the case that absence would cost them more than presence risked. The war will not pause to accommodate your fleet's hesitation, T'Prina had told him privately the night before. You do not need to decide your people's permanent future today, Commander. You need only decide what you are willing to accept in this moment and what you are not. The negotiations were, by the standards of everything Adama had endured since the colonies burned, almost civil. Nechayev, chastened by T'Prina's earlier rebuke and sobered by the cost of the recent battle, offered continued sanctuary and support without renewed pressure regarding the colonial arsenal. Kroval offered something rarer, and, to Adama, more immediately meaningful: formal recognition of the colonial fleet as an ally of the Klingon Empire, worthy of the specific, blood-earned respect that no diplomatic treaty could manufacture on its own. Talus offered nothing so generous, but her presence alone, a Romulan subcommander treating a refugee fleet as worth courting rather than dismissing, spoke to a shift in how this fractured, war-weary galaxy had begun to perceive the strangers who had fallen into it. "We are not offering you a home, Commander Adama," Vecma said, near the end of the discussion, his tone carrying the particular gravity of a man who had nearly died alongside this fleet and had earned the right to speak plainly. "That is not ours to offer, and I do not believe it is what your people are seeking. We are offering you a place in this galaxy's story, imperfect, complicated, no doubt frustrating at times. What you build from that place will be entirely your own choice." Adama looked around the table, at Roslin, weighing every word with the exhausted calculation of a leader who had spent for years learning that hope unguarded was its own kind of danger, at T'Prina, whose quiet insistence on decency had, against every instinct Adama's fleet had cultivated in the name of survival, proven itself again and again, at Kroval, whose respect had been earned through Starbuck skill rather than given as diplomatic currency, and finally out through the viewport, at the strange, unfamiliar stars of a galaxy that had never asked to inherit his people's grief, and had chosen, more than once now, to share the burden of it anyway. "We accept," Adama said finally, "not as refugees anymore, as neighbors, whatever that ends up meaning." The following weeks brought no easy resolution. This was not, T'Prina noted in the final entry of her journal before her formal reassignment to ongoing liaison duty, a story that could end in the clean triumph of a fairy tale, nor the total tragedy of a cautionary one. Sharon Valerie's true nature remained unconfirmed, unresolved, and by Adama's explicit, unshaken order, untouched by accusation until she herself chose to seek answers, a decision that honored both the fleet's need for vigilance and the fragile, hard-won principle that a person's fate should not be decided before they had a chance to choose it themselves. The Dominion wore ground on, indifferent to one refugee fleet's small, improbable survival. The colonies remained lost, their 13 tribes as scattered and grieving as ever. But something had shifted irreversibly in the space between a Battlestar's paranoid hull and a Starfleet vessel's earnest hope. A fleet that had learned, through unbearable loss, that trust was the most dangerous currency in the universe, had extended it anyway, incrementally, imperfectly, to strangers who had, against every hardened colonial instinct, proven themselves worth the risk. And a federation that had built its identity on optimism now carried, however privately, the harder wisdom of people who had survived believing the worst of everyone and had chosen otherwise anyway. Adama stood once more on Galactica's observation deck, watching a Klingon bird of prey and a Federation runabout hold formation alongside his battered, beloved Battlestar, and allowed himself, for the first time in 4 years, the dangerous luxury of something like hope, not blind, not unguarded, but hope nonetheless, earned the only way his fleet had ever earned anything, through survival, through vigilance, and through the slow, unlikely discovery that even in a galaxy that had never heard of Kobol, decency could still be found, and it could still be worth trusting, one hard-won choice at a time. The Battlestar Galactica did not find Earth in this galaxy. She found something stranger, a place to stand. What began as a blind, desperate jump away from annihilation became something no colonial survivor could have predicted in the darkest hours after the silent attacks. Not rescue, not conquest, not even alliance in the clean. Treaty-bound since the Federation understood the word. It became coexistence, earned in increments too small to notice until they added up to something unmistakable. A Klingon captain's respect, hard-won in a debris field. A Vulcan diplomat's honesty, offered when comfortable eyes would have been easier. A Starfleet captain's willingness to die transporting strangers off a doomed ship. A colonial pilot's refusal to let fear decide her friend's fate before her friend could decide it herself. None of it erased 4 years of grief. None of it answered the question of what, or who, truly slept inside Sharon Valerie, waiting. The Galaxy Galactica fell into remained at war, its politics as fractured and its history as bloody as the one she'd fled. But for the first time since the colonies burned, William Adama's fleet was no longer defined solely by what it was running from. It had become, however cautiously, a people choosing what to run toward. Somewhere beyond the reach of any censor, the Cylons still hunted a fleet they no longer knew how to find. And somewhere ahead, in a galaxy of starships and warp fields and gods it had never worshipped, the last remnant of the 12 colonies had found something it hadn't dared to hope for. Not a home yet, but the possibility of one, built not on faith alone, but on the accumulated evidence of strangers who had chosen, again and again, to be worth the risk of trusting.